Tennant, and thank you for joining us on this Vigil for Democracy sponsored by West Virginians Freedom to Vote Coalition. We are here to honor our country and to honor those who lost their lives. We had hoped to be out front of our beautiful West Virginia state capitol, but Mother Nature had other plans for us. And so I'm glad that there are folks that can be home and safe inside and off the roads. And we are here also gathered because our nation's capital was under attack. Americans were killed. We are here to remember, make sure that doesn't happen again, and ask for those who participated in this unthinkable act to be held accountable. Steps are being taken to strengthen our voting rights and the access to the ballot. It's called the Freedom to Vote Act. It is Senator Joe Manchin's signature piece of legislation. He's written it. And it's needed because the big lie after the 2020 election helped to lead to this insurrection on our Capitol. As you know, there was a Stop the Steal rally on the grounds of the West Virginia state capitol a month before this that fueled those conspiracies and the attack on the nation's capital. And that is called election sabotage. That rally was led by West Virginia Secretary of State, the person who is supposed to know and understand and stand up for the election process. He was undermining it by saying that the election was stolen and fueling the unrest that led to the insurrection. He supported the West Virginia Attorney General who took part in the bogus lawsuit to undermine our election process. Experts call that insider threats. And it is dangerous to our form of democracy because it calls into question what makes us such a great country, our freedom and our right to vote. The same election, the same ballot, the same process that got them elected, they are questioning. And it doesn't make sense. And it caused the turmoil. It caused the turmoil that led to the insurrection. Now, on that day, 1 year ago, police officers were beaten, ambushed, and tortured. And I can still think of that image of the police officer being crushed in that door and begging for help and begging for the rioters to stop because he couldn't breathe. That's just one of the many things that we will remember and have in our minds and hearts as Americans. Lives were lost that day while they were trying to protect elected officials and trying to protect our election process that asks for a peaceful transfer of power. It was anything but that a year ago. We thank them for their loyalty to our country. And before we begin, we want to honor them with a moment of silence. So I ask that you will join me in that silence for those lost. Thank you all very much for doing that. We do have a diverse group of speakers and participants for this January 6th Day of Remembrance and Action. Our first speaker is someone who was willing to put her life on the line for our safety. She did it as a police officer in groundbreaking fashion. And tonight she offers powerful words from that perspective. Ivin Lee, thank you for joining us, and go ahead.
Yes, my name is Ivin Lee, and I am a retired law enforcement officer from the Charleston Police Department. I'm also a former chief of police, the city of Dunbar. First, let me say to you that I prayed to God that he would send me the words to share with you on this anniversary of the riot on our national capital. We honor and we respect and we thank those who protect us that day, some who gave their lives. But our hearts go out to those families in their time of loss of the people in which they loved. And to the officers that survived, we honor each of you, knowing that you will live the rest of your lives reliving that day of fear, violence, and yes, the anger that you faced. Please know we stand with you in love, admiration, and much respect. But we understand the war is not over, nor is it won. A wise lady told me one time, there are three types of people. There are those who watch things happen. There are those who make things happen. And yes, there are those who sort of put their hands in their pockets and say, what happened? I want to say to each of those officers that fought for the rights for us to vote, and not only just me, but each and every one of us. And to them, we pledge this day that we will fight to be people who make things happen. Today, we honor you and we stand with you in love and trust and truth. I say to you at this time, God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. You continue to inspire us, and I'm glad to know you, and I'm glad that you're a part of this, and I'm glad that so many people have the opportunity to hear you speak and speak out for fellow law enforcement officers. Thank you. Our next speaker has been a public servant on many fronts, a U.S. Army veteran and former Deputy State Director for U.S. Senator J. Rockefeller. He's helped a lot of people in that work, and I want to welcome Wes Holden. Unmute yourself, Wes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'd like to start out with a quote by George Will, columnist George Will. He said, January 6th needs to be burned into the American mind as firmly as 9/11 because of the scale of a shock to the system. So I'd like to go on. The assault on the U.S. Capitol resulted in one of the worst days of injuries for law enforcement in the United States since 9/11. About 140 officers, 73 from the Capitol Police and 65 from the Metropolitan Police Department were injured. We will be hard pressed to find another day like this in the history of the United States when the police encountered this level of violence at one event. A year ago today, as domestic terrorists overran the United States Capitol, and by the way, did you know that protests also took place at various state capitals across the country? And two of those Capitol buildings, state employees were evacuated for their safety. Those domestic terrorists sought to overturn the defeat of Donald Trump in the 2020 presidential election by disrupting the joint session of Congress to ratify Joe Biden's election with the counting of electoral votes. Had it not been for Vice President Mike Pence and other members of Congress who demonstrated an unwillingness to perform as Trump commanded, our election outcome could have been very different. The 2020 election had the highest voter turnout ever, breaking records despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Over 159 people voted, and Biden won by 6 million votes. Now there's a new trend of lawmakers seeking to impose criminal penalties for elections because of the big lie. In the backlash of historical voter turnout, many state legislators across the country have passed legislation making it harder for American citizens to vote by limiting voter hours, reducing the number of polling locations, changing voter ID requirements for voting, and I could go on. I am here tonight to speak out against a new breed of legislator that has become all too common, one that actually has little interest in doing the job they were elected to do. They are passing laws to restrict voting rights under the guise of protecting democracy, when in fact it's just a right-wing conspiracy. Thomas Jefferson said, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free, it expects whatever it was and never will be. Some political office holders use their office as a platform, spewing undemocratic rhetoric to build up their brand rather than to legislate for public good. 49 years ago, I enlisted in the United States Army. I was a military policeman. I solemnly swore an oath that I would support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Our West Virginia legislators also swore an oath that they will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of West Virginia. I am asking that our legislators fulfill the oath they took when they took office by protecting everyone's voting rights, supporting the right to a vote amendment, by supporting the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and Manchin's voting rights package. Our elected officials need to realize that this is the people's democracy. We must keep it wide and vigorous and alive to our needs. We must remember that it is the things of the Spirit that in the end prevail. And we must learn to live generously. Protecting the right to vote is more important than protecting the filibuster. So I leave you with this thought. Which vision of American democracy will prevail? Was 2020 election the high watermark for far-right groups and actors who wish to destabilize our Republican system of government for personal gain? Or was it the last shining moment for a vision of liberal democracy that came into fruition with the civil rights reforms of the 1960s and that has been eroding ever since? Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Good words there, good statistics also. And thank you for your continued service in retirement, but I don't really feel like it's in retirement. And you're going to find that tonight, folks, a lot of continued service from a lot of people here. And West Virginia is proud of the service that we have provided to our nation. Per capita, we have more West Virginians who serve in the military than any other state. LaKeisha Loy is one of them, and she continues to serve her fellow military members in her work with Common Defense. Keisha.
Thank you, Natalie. My name is LaKeisha Loy. I'm an Army veteran who served from 2001 to 2010 as a combat military police officer. I am now a fellow organizer for Common Defense here in West Virginia. You know, a year ago, I was sitting in my old job in my office, normal, quiet day, no different than the rest, when suddenly my boss, who was actually in a separate building, bursted through the door and was yelling, "Her boss was attacking a Capitol building." My colleague and I ran out of our offices and we just stood in literal horror as the TV came on, and I saw my own countrymen and women storming the Capitol building. I stood there in shock and horror as I watched the Capitol Police being beaten and fighting for their lives by the very people who claimed that police lives matter. As a veteran, I couldn't believe that this is what I served to protect and fight for. How could Americans attack and attempt to destroy the very idea of what separates us from what we see in other countries when it comes to fair and free elections? I realized I was literally watching an attack on our democracy. The election didn't go the way that these insurrectionists wanted, so they were going to overthrow the very basis of how our government works to get the results they wanted. This way they could replace the president-elect with the president they wanted. Everything stopped that day. We never moved from our seats. No one spoke. We just watched in literal silence as a symbol of our democracy was being torn apart right before our very eyes. In the aftermath of January 6th, you know, we began to find out who these insurrectionists were. And as a veteran, to find out that there were men and women who were actively serving in the United States military and other veterans literally shook me to my very core. we all took the same oath. We took the oath to protect the United States from both enemies, foreign and domestic. However, there were men and women, service members, who were using their training to overthrow the government and our right to free and fair elections here in this country. You know, no matter our color, background, or party, most of us believe that people who betray our nation and endanger our lives have no business governing in our name. And that goes as well as going into the military and swearing service to this country. The most surprising thing to me after in the aftermath of this was the penalties, if there were any, that these insurrectionists had received. You know, active duty members were allowed to keep their jobs with a slap on the wrist. It is my true belief that all those who had participated in January 6th should have been charged with treason. If you served in the United States military and you were there, and you should have been punished to the fullest extent of the law, they should have been removed from service. They broke the law, both civilian and military. They broke their oath. They betrayed their service, their fellow service members, and the country as a whole. And as a veteran, I sit and I reflect on that day. I ask myself, is this the country that I gave my blood, sweat, and tears, mind, and body for? You know, at least 57 GOP officials in local and state offices traveled to the Trump rally on January 6th, and over 20 GOP officials either joined or watched in this insurrection directly. However, I feel even more compelled now today to stand up against that cult mentality. We can't stand idly by and allow this type of violent politics to become the norm in this country. We must all stand united and fight back against the death of our republic. The memory of January 6th, as horrible as it was, must be the battle cry for all those who stand against this demagogic, destructive force that means to end what it truly means to be American. I appreciate y'all for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your service. Great perspective that I think it's important that you can bring. Thank you. Concerned citizens speaking out is the lifeblood of our country, and it is demanded of us. And our next speaker has spoken out on many occasions. So I'd like to introduce to you Howard Swint. Howard. Howard, I think you might be muted. I can see you reaching for it. There you go.
Sorry about that. So how do you fight back? I've wondered a great deal about the people that were involved in the insurrection. We probably all know folks who may not have been there, but certainly think like those that were there. And I want to very briefly ask everyone to picture in your mind's eye the gentleman who carried the Confederate flag through the Capitol building, and then the guy who put his shoes up on the Speaker Pelosi's desk. And think about whether you're going to be able to change those people's minds. How do you fight against that? I don't think you can. And I'm going to tell you a quick story about my father's best friend. He was a World War II veteran who had been injured in battle, highly decorated. He was, by many accounts, a good man, a provider to his family, a patriot. He was also a white supremacist. He would come to our living room and use language that was never, ever, ever used by my parents. Yet it bounced off the walls, it blistered the paint. You would never have convinced Mr. Jones that he was not a patriot. You would never have convinced him that he was wrong on any of his views. These are belief systems that you'll never change. So how do you fight back? I don't know. I sometimes wonder if I had been adopted into Mr. Jones' family rather than the family that I lived in, if I would not have been a white supremacist in support of the very people that we're talking about. Yes, members of the military. Yes, patriots. Yes, people in their own mind, good Christians. How do you reach those people? Can you reach those people? And are they not Americans as well? Yes, of course, they're our neighbors. We all know them. They just have different political views that are in stark contrast to what we believe are right. So I wonder, well, nothing's new here. Mr. Jones had a Confederate belt buckle. Mr. Jones would have been there if he would have been able. And I looked up to Mr. Jones and my father. So I don't know if we reach those people or not. I think we have to think, take a different approach in how we reach the next generation, how we teach them what it is to be a patriot, what it is acceptable in our democracy, and how to go forward. I don't know in West Virginia how you go about doing that. I've often wondered if white Christian ministers are the key to being able to reach the next generation. I think that all the values that our state holds collectively can be influenced, if by no other purpose, but through the Christian religion. And I'm not a religious man in a traditional sense, but I do believe that people can be swayed to see the better angels of our nature, as Lincoln put it, and to dovetail into the higher good that needs to be served here. So those people who were in Washington during the insurrection, yes, they were Americans. They were patriots in their own mind. They were good Christian people, but they were wrong. And we need to be able to change the belief system that allows for that to become part and parcel of our American nation today. So I ask folks to think about the guy with the Confederate flag, think about Mr. Jones, think about our neighbors that we all know, and how we can maybe possibly reach them through alternative methods. Thank you all very much for the opportunity to speak.
And thank you, Howard, too. I mean, that's a lot of things to be thinking on this snowy evening in most of West Virginia. And we do think about that. A lot of the folks who are on this call, too. There have been ups and downs through this, not just talking about January 6th, but through the last 11, 12 months of working on voting rights, first the For the People Act and then the Freedom to Vote Act. And we all collectively can smile and say, yeah, we've been through ups and downs and we've helped each other along. And we knew and we continued to work because we knew it was important and we knew it was the right thing to do. And so that's why we continue on that. And I'm hopeful that as folks watch this live and then watch it again on the West Virginians for Democracy and the Citizens Action Group Facebook page, that people will, take a look and know what their fellow West Virginians are thinking. So thanks, Howard, coming to us from Pocahontas County. I really appreciate that. And next, I want to introduce you to a West Virginia mother and educator. Kristen Olsen is with the Poor People's Campaign and has been working on this a lot too. So go ahead, Kristen. Thanks for being here. And unmute yourself.
And I said I wasn't going to do that. Good evening. Thank you. So Natalie introduced me, but my name is Chris, and I am an educator. I live in Charleston, West Virginia, and I'm also the granddaughter of an orphaned immigrant preacher from Norway. And more importantly, one of 140 million people struggling under the thumb of an unjust evil policies that put profits above people. It's become clear that we need a moral resurrection to end these injustices and to save the heart and soul of our democracy. Today, as we gather to remember the past, we look forward to a brighter future that we will build together by coming across the lines that divide us. Let's be clear, this is not about left or right, Democrat or Republican. This is about what is morally right versus what is wrong. We are in a fight for the very soul of our nation. And we know that it is those of us who are most impacted by these injustices who have the moral authority to speak out against what holds us down. The Poor People's Campaign is committed to lifting up and deepening the leadership of those most affected by the systemic oppression of racism, poverty, the war economy, and ecological devastation, and building unity across lines of division. We are organizing from the hood to the holler. When we come together, nothing can stop us, and we will get what we're organizing to take. because we are stronger than the system that we fight against. Our democracy is hanging by a thread. We need all of you who love what is right to join us at our nation's capital on June 18th, 2022, as we make a declaration together to our elected leaders. We won't stop until we win, and our finish line is victory. We are committed to an ongoing moral movement to make real policies that fully address poverty and low wealth, lifting our nation from the bottom up and dispelling the false narrative that blames poverty on the poor. We are educating and empowering each other for a movement that votes our power. We uphold the need to do a season of sustained, moral, nonviolent, direct action until our demands are met. And at the core of all of these interlocking injustices is the attack on our voting rights. 400 bills have been introduced to restrict voting rights since the attack on our democracy a year ago. A silent war has been waged against our very voices. Senator Manchin, we need you to end the racist filibuster that you had no problem circumventing for the debt ceiling, but are refusing to budge on for the preservation of our most sacred right to vote. Senator Manchin, your delay on voting rights is allowing a political coup d'etat to sweep through state legislatures, threatening our very democracy in a quiet insurrection. 40% of West Virginians are poor and low income, yet our senator, who could help us live, is failing us in every way. Senator Manchin, your denial to pass Build Back Better is blocking 61 million children that could be lifted out of poverty by the child tax credit. Stop telling lies about inflation. We're not buying it. We know the truth. World-renowned economists like Jeffrey Sachs say that investing in the people will not raise inflation, but will help the economy thrive. Invest in the people. Invest in us. Believe in us. You voted to spend $7 trillion in military spending over the next 10 years, but you can't find just a fraction of that, $1.9 trillion, for the people who fight every day just to live. Come and talk to us, Senator Manchin. Come and have a town hall, have several town halls. Hear what we are saying. You say on the news that you can't vote for something that you can't explain to us. Well, we are screaming for you to explain to us why you are not voting for what we so desperately need. And all we hear from you is crickets. That's why we will be starting a call-in campaign tomorrow. Join us by going to thepoorpeoplescampaign.org. Sign up to be a part of this powerful, generationally transformative movement. And join us for a mass call-in campaign beginning tomorrow to the offices of the three main senators who are blocking this nation to end the filibuster, pass Build Back Better, and protect voting rights as a step in the right direction. All power to the people, forward together, and not one step back. Thank you.
Chris, thank you for being on here. I would also like to mention, I know that we have a lot of going on in the chat, and I wanted to say, Jack, if it's the Jack Rogers that I know, please put your question. You have your hand up. We can't take attendees' questions or hands up quite yet, or maybe we might not be able to at all. So if you can put your question in the chat, that would be much appreciated, and that would help us to answer your question too. So Chris, thank you. Next up, we have Zach Shrewsbury, who served our country as a U.S. Marine, and he continues to serve as part of Common Defense and standing up for our veterans. So Zach, we want to hear from you too. Go ahead.
Thank you, Natalie. My message is a little bit different than what we've been hearing. So my name is Zach Shrewsbury. I'm a proud Marine Corps veteran, and you're probably gonna be surprised when I tell you that when I saw the insurrection on January 6th, I saw an opportunity. Now, how can anyone feel that way? Of course, I was initially dismayed, disturbed, watching the events unfold. Who wouldn't be? But I wasn't shocked. Political tensions and fears were at an unbridled all-time high, and this was the result. As I witnessed what was happening, the words of Mariam Kaba began to echo in my head. Let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair. And I immediately began to see an opportunity to show the country who we were as veterans and progressives. While I wasn't shocked, I did experience a myriad of emotions: anger, sadness, disgust, resolve, weariness. These actions of these individuals do not represent my values as a veteran. These actions of these individuals do not represent the ideals instilled in me as a patriot and an American. As a veteran, I chose to serve and protect this nation As a political organizer and advocate, I have carried these choices forward to fight for my country in the legislative arena. These are patriotic American values that I hold dear. We are called to defend this country, not divide it. I wanted justice. I also wanted to temper that justice with mercy. I began to ponder what this looked like. What would justice look like to me? First and foremost, the ringleaders, yes, must be jailed. This event was wholly unacceptable. How dare these men and women make a mockery of our nation and our democracy? Lives were lost and endangered. Those who orchestrated the planning of this must be swiftly brought to justice. I agree. And yes, that also means our political figureheads too. They are not above the law simply because they hold office. If anything, they should be held more accountable. To this day, some continue to spread lies about a stolen 2020 election. How this is not tantamount to yelling fire in a crowded theater when no such fire exists. They must be punished too. Further, I believe justice would be served by passing the Freedom to Vote Act. The Freedom to Vote Act, if passed, would serve as the most crucial piece of voting rights and anti-corruption legislation in the history of the U.S. Across America, our voices are being silenced and our democracy is being threatened through dark money, unnecessary voting restrictions, lack of voting access, and partisan gerrymandering in an attempt to sabotage fair elections. This cannot continue, and the passage of the Freedom to Vote Act would ensure that doesn't. But what about the others at the Capitol that day? There were many veterans in that crowd, my fellow brothers and sisters in service. Many of them were following disreputable media outlets that printed outright lies, making them believe their nation was under attack, and they were trying to defend it. It's the same situation with political beliefs. Some veterans are more susceptible to believing falsehoods than others. They acted out because they were directed to act in that manner. I see this as an opportunity to reach across the aisles for the process of calling them back to a genuine veteran national values of unity and truth. So I'll quote Jimmy Carter when he said, "The bond of our common humanity is stronger than the divisiveness of our fears and prejudices." I believe these words. I also reflected on what this event meant to me personally as a veteran. Did this change the way I felt about myself? Did it impact my own identity? Ultimately, no, it did not. I'm firmly rooted in my beliefs. As a progressive, as a Marine Corps veteran, a Democrat, and American, every veteran does not come from the same mold. I can only be responsible for myself. I can only control my behavior. I can only dictate how my personal behavior reflects my experience as a veteran. Thus, my identity stays intact as I continue my way of service. So why don't I preach the message of unite rather than divide? And how have I led to reform those who do not orchestrate but support the action of the sticks through ways of service? So just to be clear, there's a clear difference with leaders and followers. I have been personally making a point for this past year to engage with various followers on their level through my political organizing and advocacy. I refrain from judgment and engage them in conversations and meet them where they're at. The results have been mixed. Some now understand this is wrong, others will require more effort. But that's okay. I'm here for it, and more of us need to be here for it as well to bring our fellow Americans back into the fold. I employ the earlier quote from Miriam Cobb and Jimmy Carter. I'm a leader, I do not despair. I use this opportunity to radicalize and build and to unify. An opportunity missed is an opportunity lost. So I'm going to close this with a final quote from the Roman poet Horace. That quote is Carpe Diem, or seize the day. My name is Zach Shrewsbury. I'm a proud U.S. Marine veteran and a proud American. Thank you for having me.
Zach, thank you for all that you do too. Some great words there, more to think about. That's what we're hopeful that this folks can listen to this. I know it's a snowy night, but maybe everybody's in and they're listening. And I know that Jack Rogers is. We talked about him. He's talking about a public servant, longtime public servant, lawyer. In case others can't read this, he says, "Very well said to all our speakers, especially the poor people's representative. In addition to bombarding Joe Manchin to pass the Voters' Right Act, he said, I ask that everyone join in demanding Mac Warner's impeachment and the annulment of his bar license. There is simply no justification for our chief election official to be all in on the fraudulent claim of election impropriety produced by Fox News and the Republican Party." Now, we talked about that earlier, that's how, the big lie, the stop the steal, led up to a lot of the unrest and undermining of the election and the insurrection also. And Jack, I will add, as you can see also in the chat, we have phone numbers for Senator Capito also, as well as Senator Manchin. That would be beautiful bipartisan support if we had Capito and Manchin together. that would really pass this legislation and really work on it and really put West Virginia in a great spot. And so we have a lot of people who are making those phone calls and making that work. And it's our young people who are so important to our future. They've been standing up and speaking out for fair elections and accessible voting rights. Y'all seeing this, that yes, we are talking about today's anniversary of January 6th, but it all goes back to voting rights. That's how we solve this and can really work on it. And so joining us right now is Deidre Keys Switzer, who is the coordinator for Young West Virginia. Thanks for being on with us, Deidre.
Oh, thank you, Natalie. Well, I first just want to bring up, in this conversation, we've talked about, so much, but we also have talked about, kind of how is this an example for young people, right? What does this mean to young people, the insurrection? And I'm going to backtrack and first, of course, say my heart goes to all the people who lost their lives that day and who, of course, had life-altering experiences due to those who were rioting. But what I'd say is when we ask ourselves, how does this impact youth? How does this impact, really the people who we, at many times consider the future, right, of our country? The first thing that comes to mind is when you think about and when you research, what exactly did young people say in this critical moment in time? The two top words that young people associated with this event was violent. The second thing was anti-American. So what I'd like to say is our young people recognize how horrid and how detrimental to our democracy this event was. But I think us as a country, as a community, as a state, we have to ensure that we are, of course, allowing our young people to commit and to dedicate themselves to their civic processes as much as possible. We are in West Virginia, so we do have to make sure that the spread of misinformation stops at our youth, and that these militants who, raided our Capitol don't have the opportunity to wiggle their way into the minds of our youth, thinking that is somehow okay, or that is somehow what our country looks like, right? So what I'd say is for our youth, we need to ensure that their voices are heard now and, for as long, right, as possible into the nearest of futures, or into the farthest of futures, excuse me. And we need to do that by ensuring that they have access to voting rights in full, right? We need to make sure that they have every opportunity for their voice to be heard on a civic level, at each level, right? And we need to do that by making sure that we are pushing through the strong legislation, and ensuring that we're really putting our officials, right? We're really putting pressure on them to make sure that we're securing these voting rights, not just for us and not just for our voices, but really for the voices of the youth and for the people that will be here when we are all gone, right? So what I say is that our youth, they know that this was not something that was right. They know that this was something that was really detrimental and a huge, just or one of the many smears, right, of our country's history. But they also know that this is not the country that they have to, they know that this is not just, they know that there is a future to our country, and they know that they're a part of it. And they know that there is a better space for them, but we have to start that by, of course, securing their place and securing their voice. So we need to do that by that legislation. Yep.
Very, very well said. And I'm glad that you brought the point of view. And I think it's so important for our youth that, for those of us who might been in this for a little while, it's the fresh faces and the fresh voices. And I think that we can get Senator Manchin to respond to that. Certainly, I'd like to see Senator Capito respond to some of that too. And even our state lawmakers, because Sue Morgan brings up a good point, kind of a question and a statement. She said, I agree that there are plenty of folks on the federal level and elsewhere in the US. I'm concerned about voter suppression at a state level here in West Virginia. What things do we have to worry about this spring as the legislative bodies convene? And that's a great question because Sue, it's exactly what we're seeing. Some folks will say, oh, well, it's great in West Virginia. Now, there are some things that are really good, and I'll take credit for that. Just joking, we all work together. But that is what we're seeing in other states, other legislatures that are having sabotage on our elections. Georgia is a great example. When they wanted to change after they lost the election and lost the 2 U.S. senators and lost the presidential race, they changed the rules on it and even threw out some of the election officials. And that's why the Freedom to Vote Act is so important that Senator Manchin put in there, the protection of poll workers and election workers and the protection of the authority of the Secretary of State and election administrator. So that's important. But you ask what we should be looking for in the West Virginia legislative when the bodies convene in a week from a week from yesterday. Well, we know that Senate Bill 565 was introduced last year. And there are many folks on this call who worked against it because we knew the three terrible parts of the bill were they were shifting the most popular parts of early voting and shifting it off, and it would make it more difficult or change the process for voters. They were working to gut the AVR, automatic voter registration, and to make it easier to start the purge on those who are registered to vote from 4 years to 2 years. Well, guess what? Some of the proposals that we're seeing in the legislative session, those 3 things aren't in there. And you can thank yourself. You can thank the youth of West Virginia. You can thank the activists. You can thank all of the folks that you see on here, because we went to the legislature and we were part of a public hearing. So those are things that are important. And if some of my other folks want to put in here what else they think might be coming up, there's some technical bills that, as far as election goes, will be addressed. There's a few that on the surface look okay. I dig a little deeper and say, well, we really need to have this to be able to have education purposes when it comes to funding for elections. So those are some of the things. So now I want to go to someone who is no stranger to voting rights efforts. And maybe she'll share a little bit of that too, but I know she's been working really hard on the Freedom to Vote Act. She was the national president of the League of Women Voters, the national president from West Virginia, and she helped to get the National Voter Registration Act passed in 1993. That's NVRA. It is the law that the national law that gave us the motor voter bill. Other folks call it, I call it MVRA, other folks call it the motor voter, which gave easier access to voter registration at the DMV and other state agencies. And so she knows personally the importance of the Freedom to Vote Act. And she's also the current Charleston City Council president. And Becky, please share some of I know you have great stories and great input. You can't share it all in about 3 minutes or so, but thank you for being here. And thank you for speaking up and letting folks around the state and across the country hear from us in West Virginia and hear the good that you've done.
Well, thank you, Madam Secretary. I really appreciate the kind words. And I guess just like everybody else, I'm thinking, why are we here? Well, I mean, as has been mentioned, on January 6th, a year ago, our U.S. Capitol was actually stormed by destructive mob that threatened the very core of our democracy. And since then, as has been mentioned, state by state, and I think there have been just in 2021, there were 18 states that have passed some sort of legislation to restrict and deny voting rights to eligible citizens. Again, destroying the very concepts that our country is based on, of, by, and for the people, and the consent of the governed. Protecting the right to vote in America is actually the bedrock of our society. Without it, we don't exist as we know this country and as we love this country. Unfortunately, There are folks who would systematically block access to the polls for minorities and for people who they feel don't agree with them or don't believe the way that they do. But the U.S. Senate, as has been mentioned, does have the ability to put the people right back where they belong, in the voting booth. And that is with the passage of the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. These pieces of legislation have what is absolutely necessary for us to continue our freedom and continue our democracy as we know it. What we're seeking is a set of national standards that would guarantee access to this election process for all of the eligible voters in America. And that's why we're here today. And in terms of the past and the ability to work on legislation, I've worked on voting rights legislation for over 50 years. And I can tell you that it does make a difference. And we have been able to put people back in the voting booth. And it is the kind of things that are happening this evening. And the coalition of the people that have been on this call and that have spoken on this call that will make that happen. And having wonderful elected officials like Secretary Tennant certainly goes a long way. Thank you.
Becky, thank you very much. We do need to have like a Tennant talk sometime, and you tell the story about even the bill signing ceremony for the motor voter law in 1993. She has some good stuff with President Clinton and Vice President Gore. So thank you very much. I also want to mention before, we do have a lot of good people on here, and Sally Roberts Wilson is making sure that if you all are checking the chat, as a follow-up to today's Day of Unity for January 6th, there's a critical window, as she says, where people can be engaged to remain active in the democratic movement. And we're going to be asking that too. You can join Common Cause for a phone banking opportunity to contact other West Virginians. And if you click on that link in the chat, then it'll take you to another window that you can go visit later on. So that's how that's going to work. And there's Julie, who's here too, and Marion, who's been working so hard on all of this. Let me see. I was just trying to go through some of the questions and the statements that are being made. Julie says, "Thank you, Becky. Proud to be a member of the League of Women Voters." All right, we know that. So now our final speaker of the night is no stranger to many of us. His words and his actions have taken care of many of us at the same time. So I want to welcome Reverend David Freisen, founding vice president of West Virginia University Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, and pastor at the First Baptist Church of Kanawha City. And I guess Reverend too, are we welcoming you back too? I'm so glad that you're back in West Virginia, you're with us, and we're still working and making it happen. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. I'm actually here for the Christmas holidays. My tenure in Boston is not yet over, and so we'll be leaving here within the next week or so. But I am very honored to have an opportunity to speak and to be on this Zoom call tonight. And I'm here, to be quite frank, because of my belief in West Virginia. I've spent my life standing up for West Virginia, pushing back against stereotypes that we often have in West Virginia. And so I think it is very important that at this point, at this monumental point in our country's history, that we stand up for our motto, because our motto in West Virginia, as you so well know, is Mountaineers are always free, which means we have always fought for freedom. It was the 50 counties of Western Virginia that became West Virginia that stood against the Confederacy because we believe in freedom. It was the J.R. Clifford, the first African-American attorney who did the Williams case that allowed African-American teachers to have equal pay. And this is in the 1800s. West Virginia was on the forefront. Someone mentioned earlier how many people from West Virginia have served in the military. And I think that's so very important. Why? Because West Virginians have always believed in freedom. And all that I am suggesting that we need to have from Senator Manchin and Senator Moore Capito is just really live up to their family name. It was A. James Manchin in 1948 who stood for African-American voting rights at a time when it was not popular. Believe it or not, it was Arch Moore who during his time in Congress voted for the 1957 Civil Rights Act, the 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1967 Civil Rights Act, and the 1968 Civil Rights Act. And so all I'm asking for our senators is to stand up for their family names. And their family have always stood. They have always stood for this idea of expansion of our freedom. And I believe it's one of the first time in our history that rather than expanding voting rights, that we have so many people who are trying to diminish voting rights. That's why we need the Freedom to Vote Act so very much. We need to protect our Democracy Act. Of course, the John Lewis Voting Act is so very important, and we cannot stand silent at a time when the voting privileges of legitimate registered voters are being pushed back. One of the things that I haven't heard said tonight, and I think is so very important as a state of West Virginia that came about because of our stand for freedom, is that we need to stand for the DC statehood. Because I think right now the District of Columbia has been taxed without representation for almost 200 years, for over than 200 years. And I think that it's important that DC receive their statehood. And all I am saying that as whether you are conservative or liberal, whether you're Republican or Democrat, this is not about a political party. It's about doing what is right. And what is right is the fact that everyone should have an opportunity to vote and to participate in the process of freedom in America. As I said at the beginning, as a West Virginian, I have always stood for who we are and to push back against the stereotypes. And I want the nation to know that we in West Virginia, we are not buying into the big lie. We are not a bunch of people who are just allowing those who are lying about the past election to affect us in the future. But we want to stand for everything that's right, everything that is correct, and everything that is free. And finally, Leonard Ravenhill once said that the opportunities of a lifetime must be seized during the lifetime of the opportunity. And I believe that we have a lifetime of an opportunity right now. And I believe that even though we aren't talking about that, the lifetime of the opportunity is the Build Back Better Act. The lifetime of the opportunity is the Freedom to Vote Act. The opportunity of a lifetime is the John Lewis voting rights. And I believe that, that history will judge us very harshly if we allow these opportunities to pass by, where we don't allow everyone to participate in our well-ordered democracy. I believe in West Virginia. I believe in the United States of America. And my prayer is that we will do the right thing. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Reverend, and thank you for being there with us. And I know you're doing good work up in Boston as interim president, I think that is.
Well, not interim vice president.
Okay. Still doing good work, and I appreciate that. Spreading some West Virginia everywhere.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. As you can see, I don't want to say our work is not finished, because in elections and election administration, because remember, January 6th, yes, but it goes back to voting rights and accessibility. It's not finished. I have some people who will criticize me on social media and say, oh, well, Natalie, I thought you did all these great things as Secretary of State and you made these reforms. Why do we have to change anything? Well, it's about building on. Yes, we brought online voter registration to West Virginia. And there were some who pushed back, some county clerks who pushed back against it. And once they saw how effective it was and how easy it was for them to do their work, now they've embraced it. Well, then the next step would be automatic voter registration. And then the next step should be same-day voter registration, especially for such a rural state that we have. And then we talk about the election. And I think it was either Howard or Wes who talked about how many people voted in the 2020 election, and it's shown as being the most efficient and the highest voter turnout. Yet we still have people who attack our Capitol and attack police officers to try to overthrow the most successful election that we've had from 2020. And you would think that West Virginia state lawmakers would say, you know what, we did do a good job. We're going to make no excuse absentee voting permanent in West Virginia because more than 224,000 people wanted it and they embraced it. But no, they put it aside. So those are some of the reasons that we need the Freedom to Vote Act. It would make that national standard. And there's not anything wrong with having standards in our life and having national standards too, especially when it comes to elections. So we continue to move forward in a strong, determined, unified manner, as you see, because 1 year later, after January 6th, some of the same faction that attacked our country on that day is hard at work trying to silence our voices by restricting our freedom to vote, by attacking our fair voting districts. We didn't really even talk about redistricting and what that could be solved by the Freedom to Vote Act. And they're quietly preparing future attempts to sabotage free and fair elections and with our democracy by doing that. There are some secretaries who I have talked to, secretaries of state around the country, who say, 2020 was only practice. Watch out for 2022 and 2024. So that's why we're having events like this. That's why we continue to make phone calls and continue to push forward, because we can make a difference, and you can make a difference also by joining us. You see that Eve, who's with CAG, has also put on here. We want you to make phone calls. We want you to make phone calls to Senator Manchin and Senator Capito, and the numbers are right there. 202. They both start the same way. 202-224. Senator Manchin's is 3954. The last four digits of Senator Capito is 6472. So make those phone calls. Ask them to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, without delay. We're hopeful that we can get something up, obviously before Martin Luther King Day. The King family is so concerned that says, how are we really going to celebrate Martin Luther King Day if we don't have these voting rights bills passed, the Freedom to Vote Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And so I just wanted to go through here. Jack, he's really working on these lawyers. And he said, well said, David, restores my faith in lawyers. And he says that it's important to know the Republicans are in agreement. And he said, kudos to Betty Ireland. She's former Secretary of State right before I was, many other Republican stalwarts who protect voting rights. He says, I miss them. Also wanted to mention that Jennifer Wells, I don't know if it's the snow or it's just West Virginia, her internet went down, but she is a West Virginia voter and the deputy director of the Black-led Organizing Community Change Action, was going to be here and talk with us. And thank you for all of you who have joined here. Will Dawson just says, how can the internet be down in West Virginia? We have such solid infrastructure. Yeah, I know. All right. Tongue in cheek there. So make the phone calls. Let me see any more questions. So we can come together and we can help to prevent another January 6th attack and realize the promise of democracy for all of us, no matter our color, our zip code, or our income. So we can all have an equal say in the decisions that shape our daily lives and future. So thank you for giving us an hour. This will be up on Facebook, and it'll be a possibility for you to be able to share the link. And we ask you to share it with your friends, with your family members, and just, get a feel for what we think about January 6th here in West Virginia and what we're doing to make sure it doesn't happen again in many ways, because voting rights our foundation, is our right. The voting right is our right, is our first right to all the other rights that we've had. You've heard that said before. So we're going to keep working toward that. So thank you all very much for being here. Thank you to the panelists, and thank you especially to the attendees for tuning in. And thank you to the media. I know we had several folks on here. I appreciate your being here and sharing this as well. So we'll see you. We'll see you as we continue to work. Have a good evening, everyone.